Hey game designers, in this video we're going to teach you how to make different rock formations. In this video I'm going to cover how to make a rock path like this in Vectary, a campfire, and a rock mount. Okay, so this is kind of the after picture, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm actually going to head and delete these because I don't want these to kind of um, uh, be in the way. So I'm kind of going to delete this. I'm going to delete my campfire, delete my rock path, delete my rock mount. So you can always hide and unhide by clicking here on these eyes. So this first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually do some little bit of cleanup. Okay. So when we last left off, we had these uh, primitives, spheres and boxes, and then we added noises and twists and even some skew to kind of make different rocks. And of course, you guys can go and make more rocks if you choose. That's kind of up to you. So once you're done with the appearance of the rock and you're pretty happy with it, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to convert it to geometry and merge them together. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and convert it to geometry. You see when I convert it to geometry, it gets rid of the fact that I used a twist, a bend, a noise, and it just calls it a sphere. Once you're kind of done with the rock and you feel like you're happy with it, let's go ahead and call this rock number 3. And I'm going to go to the same thing. I'm going to go to the second rock here that's made from a sphere, and then I added noise to it. We're going to convert it to geometry. And we're going to rename it rock 2. And we're going to click on the one I started with the box, and I made some noise and kind of made it look like mountain rock here. I'm going to go ahead and convert it to geometry, and I'm going to go ahead and rename it, and I'm going to call it rock 1. So this is kind of like cleanup. It kind of gets rid of all the process, all the processes you use to make the rock, and basically now I can't go back and change the amount of noise or change the dimensions of the spheres. It's kind of like I finalize my rock, I'm ready to go. When I say finalize, doesn't mean that it's like final. You can still come in here and go ahead and edit it if you want to come in here and edit the geometry specifically. But right now we're just going to leave it with objects. Okay, so I'm kind of going to leave. Let's kind of find a good place to put these 3 rocks. So I'm just going to take these 3 rocks and teach you guys a little bit about how to move them locally and globally. So you can see here under transformations, they give you 3 options or 5 options. You can choose the gizmo to appear on the top of the object, the center of the object, or the bottom of the object. And you can choose between local gizmos, meaning that if you rotated it, it would remember its rotation, or the global, which is what you usually do when you want to move it around the world. So we're going to use global quite a lot. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just move them next to each other. So I'm going to move that one over here. I'm going to go to global, center it, kind of move it over here. And I'm going to make sure before I make my rock formations that they're kind of aligned horizontally. So you see here I use the Alt key and my left click, hold Alt, left click, and I can kind of snap and I can see if my rocks are aligned the way I want it. So I'm going to do center here, and actually I can just type in a number. I'm going to type in 0, and it kind of moves the center of the object to 0 globally. Globally to 0. I'm going to click on the center of the object, global. I'm going to go in here and type in 0, and now all my objects are aligned globally to the ground. So they're kind of half in the dirt, half on top of the surface. Okay, so now that we have all of our 3, I'm actually not going to play with my originals. That's kind of a bad idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take all these and group them. So how do you do that? You just go ahead and hold Control, Shift, Control to click them all. You're going to right click and they're going to allow you to group. So eventually we're going to be able to learn all the hotkeys. This one's pretty easy. Control G makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and group them. And then I'm going to duplicate this group and then hide the original just so that I don't mess around with my original here. So I'm going to do Control D. It's going to create a group just like it. It's obviously there, right there. And I'm going to always use the origin as kind of where I'm going to start making stuff. So I'm going to take these three rocks and I'm going to go ahead and hide them. So I'm just going to click on hide and maybe even lock it, hide it. So now we don't see it. And I'm going to collapse it so it saves me some room. All right, so let's get started. So let's go ahead and do the rock path first. So I have these three rocks, and I'm gonna kind of leave it here, and I'm gonna go ahead and make another duplicate. So I'm gonna duplicate it, and now I'm gonna use the gizmos to move them along the XY axis, so it still stays at 0, or it should. If I center it, it should be roughly 0 still. Okay. And let's go ahead and teach you the first way to duplicate and create this rock path. So, when you're making a bunch of rocks, obviously you don't want to sit there and manually duplicate. There's um, a function called, under the generate tool, array linear. Array just means a list of things or multiple things, and the last word, meaning linear, means it's going to do it in a linear path. So we're going to click on this, and with the default settings, it creates 5 copies. So you can see here, if I scroll out, there are 5 copies of this thing. So let's decide that our module 5 project, that we're going to make the entire scene on this 40 by 40 grid. So imagine that maybe each square is 1 yard or 1 meter. So this is about 40 meters, which is pretty close to what our project was supposed to be. So this is 40 meters, and each rock is probably going to meet like 1 meter. So you can decide how you want to do it, but I'm going to go ahead and make a nice round number. Let's go 300 rocks. So I'm going to make 100 copies of these things. And then I'm going to change the offset. So you can see how this rock and this rock are not next to each other. And that's because of the default offset here. So if you click kind of in the middle here, and you can scroll down and kind of control how it meets here. And now I have all these rocks in one line, all 300 rocks of them. So you can see it kind of goes way over there. So now that I kind of have have them all nice and lined up, I'm going to click on the, not this square, but this square. And this is the scale tool. I'm just going to scale it way down. Okay. And then I'm going to use my global gizmo here and just make sure that I'm going ahead and move it, kind of go to the top view here. And I'm going to use this tool and move it over here and see how much more I have to scale down. So I have 300 rocks, and I think that's pretty reasonable to go across the map. And I'm going to go ahead and keep on scaling down until I get about the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and move it over here, kind of center it. I want to go across the entire map here, kind of center it, maybe make it a little bit bigger. Oop, wrong way. And there, I'm going to go ahead and center this baby. Move it to center right there, and then scale it upward, and there we go. So now we have this rock path. So let's go ahead and kind of zoom in real quick and take a look at it. So one of the critiques you can have about my rock path is that the rocks are pretty much even. Oh, let me go ahead and change this to 0. Make sure that you place it on the ground, 0. And that they all look very uniform, right? So I always told you guys that, rocks obviously aren't uniformly put across a path like this. They're to make them look different, because obviously we're not going to have that many unique rocks. We're going to go ahead and use a tool called Randomize. So let's see, I can either do Randomize or Noise. Let's try Randomize. So if we go Randomize, it's going to randomize the position and all types of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably downscale the position randomization. Okay. And let's see if I go ahead and change the rotations. And this is not what I thought it would be. So I'm going to undo this. So for example, this is a good time for me to teach you guys how to undo effects. So basically I applied this tool called Randomize. And if I don't like the way it's turning out, you can simply right click on that tool that you use because it kind of memorizes it. And we're going to dissolve it. And dissolves it just means I'm going to undo that process. Now, obviously, you guys could hit Control Z, but you can dissolve things even if it's built on top of another effect. So I dissolved the randomize. I didn't like it, and I'm actually going to use a different tool called noise. So go ahead and click on noise, and by default it has this number, and it created a noise on terms of um, the curve. So let's go ahead and play with these settings and see we can reduce the noise so that it's not like curving our path. So let's maybe leave it at 1 here. And if I look at these rocks, does it look like it has rotated or done any type of change um, to our rocks? And it looks like the answer is no, the noise is not enough. So if I increase the noise, let's say to 2, it will bend and rotate my rock path just a slight bit. But my other concern again is it is it doing what I want it to do? Is it? Nope, and this is not what I want either. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And I'm going to dissolve that effect. So I'm actually going to keep my array linear. And I forgot that you can actually just go ahead and do a rotational offset right here. So I'm actually going to rotate it using the array linear that we had before. So let's go about 60. And you can see now that the rocks, each time they're replicated, is rotated. So it doesn't seem like it's the same rock anymore because it's been rotated on a different axis. So this kind of prevents the illusion that the rocks are symmetrical. Okay, and now that we have that, let's see if I can add noise now and see if it does what I like it to do now. And that just kind of ruins my curve, so I'm actually not going to do it. I'm going to go ahead and either Control Z or dissolve it. I'm just going to leave it at array linear. I think that's fine. Unfortunately, Vectary under my research does not have any curve tools where we can align this along a curve. So we're just going to create straight paths. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and duplicate it. So I'm going to duplicate another one, Control D, and it's going to create another array linear. And I'm just going to move it, to create a rock path, a linear rock path. And go ahead and create it like this. Um, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of a cheap trick because now the problem is even though we randomize the rotations, they're right next to each other. So you can kind of see that this rock and this rock and this rock and this rock look very much the same. So we're just going to do a cheap trick. We're going to rotate this 180 degrees. So I kind of rotate it by hand. And you can see that this is the number that's changing. So I'm going to rotate this to, let's go 0. And just make sure that, let me undo that real quick. Okay, so originally it was on 0, 0. I'm just going to take this and go 180. And basically, I just basically flipped the front to back and the back to the front. And now these rocks that are across from each other don't look linear anymore or don't look the same. So there we have it, just a rock path. So again, once you are finalized that this is the rock path that you want, you can go ahead and click on the stuff and merge it. So if you like these rocks and you like this rock path and you're pretty much decided that this is what I'm going to do, you're going to right click and you're going to merge it all into one mesh. And now you're going to rename it. I'm going to rename it straight rock path. Okay, so let's get started with the next one. The next one we're going to work on is how to make a campfire. So I'm going to again go back to my group right here, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it because again I don't want to mess with the original ones here. So I'm going to move it toward the origin. Let's go ahead and make sure that it's still pretty flat to the ground. So I'm going to go globally here and check that it's 0. Okay, and I don't think that's 0. Let's check the bottom or the center of it. Okay, the center pivot, make it 0. There we go. So now it's centered, and we're going to do something similar. So we're going to create duplicates of this rock. So I'm going to go to my array linear, and I'm going to create, I don't know, let's do 15. So 3 times 5 is already 15, so that's good. Let's go ahead and change the offset again so you can see that 15 rocks kind of go way over there. I want it to be side by side by side. So I'm just going to go ahead and move them, the offset, so that they're, kind of side by side here. I'm going to add some rotation. Um, let's see, let's try this one, 60 degrees. Okay, so 60 degrees along the x-axis. Let's go 60 degrees along the y. Nope, don't want that. Keep that 0. How about the z? Nope, that also rotates it off the axis. So just on your x is fine. Okay, and let's see, and let's go ahead and add some noise as well. So I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go see if I like my noise tool now. Go ahead, add some noise, and it kind of twists it a little bit in different angles. I kind of like that. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is leave the default noise. Is turn it into a circle. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the bend tool. So there's under the deform tool, there's a bend. We're going to bend this thing into a circle. So we're going to click on the bend tool. And if you can see, it bends it kind of upward right now. You see how it looks like this and it bends upward? And that's because the direction in which we're bending is not correct. So we're going to change the direction of the bend to X. And now it looks like it's bending, kind of starting to bend in the correct circle. So the angle in which we're bending, obviously a circle is 360 degrees. And now you can see that we have a loop. And the problem is it's not rotated correctly. So you can change that with direction. So we're going to make it a 90-degree rotation here. And there you have it. We have a rock campfire now. Let's go ahead and center this thing, global center, and let's go ahead and kind of move it back to the origin. I'm going to put 0 here, the center of it. And is it centered at the origin? Doesn't look like it is. Let's go ahead and move it closer to the origin. Oh yeah, 0, 0, 0 on the X, 0 on the Z. Okay, and let's go ahead and scale it down now that we kind of have what we want. I'm going to scale it down, and again, let's just treat each let's see, how come it's still not centered? Center, global. That's weird. Okay, so make it 0, 0, 0. There we go. Okay, so again, let's treat each one of these squares as 1 meter or approximately 3 feet. And I don't know, campfires are about what, 6 feet around and 6 feet. And if you ever want to like center your camera on the object, just hit A, and A will center on the object. Okay, or actually technically it'll fit it to the screen, which also centers it to the object. Okay. All right. So and there you have it. We have a campfire. So once we're kind of finished with our campfire, we're going to go ahead and right click and do some cleanup. We're going to merge it all into one geometry, and then we're going to rename it campfire. Okay. And I'm just going to move it to the side now that we're done with it. Let's go ahead and move it over here somewhere. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to teach you how to do is how to make a rock mound. So a rock mound is just a word for basically a whole bunch of rocks put together in a pile. And think about it as a pile of rocks. And especially in old days, people use it to, make graves or shrines or dedications to the gods and all types of things. Or sometimes they just appear naturally based on the way rocks are formed. So basically, we're going to take these rocks and we're going to go ahead and put it on top of another object. So that object, let's go ahead and use a cone. So I'm going to make a basic primitive called a cone. And they're going to give us, just like the attribute editor, some things that we can do. So how this tool works is that it will place any object you want on top of another object's point or face. So I'm going to decide to use 100 rocks. And let's say whatever my favorite rock is. And I'm going to put it on top of this cone on each face. So let's go ahead and change number of faces. Let's go ahead and change the appearance first. My rock mount is probably be a little bit more flat, something like that. And let's see if I like the height. It's a little bit too tall, so I'm gonna kind of shrink the height of it. Looks something look like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and change the number of radius. So the radius segments and the height segments control how many faces there are. So if you have 10 segments and 10 segments of radius and 2 segments of height, that's 20 faces. So let's say I want to make 100 rocks. I'm going to go ahead and increase this to 10. So now I have 10 height segments and 10 radius segments, and that will make 100. All right, so let's go ahead and turn this into vertices, faces, and edges so that I can kind of adjust the appearance. So I'm going to click on Convert Geometry. And now if I go to the Edit window, I can actually control the edges, faces, and whatnot. And this is a good opportunity to kind of teach you how to do some of the things we were doing before on Maya, but now in Vectary. So I'm going to go ahead and snap my tool to the top view here. And I'm going to go and do, let's go ahead and do vertices. So suppose that I want to take the top 3 rings. I'm going to kind of actually change my mind and change it to these 3 right here, or change it to the side view here. And I'm going to use the selection tool and the marquee tool. So unlike Maya, where there's a Q tool and it'll let you do the marquee tool separately or together, they kind of made it a separate tool here. So let's just kind of remember the hotkey M for marquee. So marquee select. I'm going to click on M here now, and I'm going to select let's say the half of the mount, and I'm going to kind of shift it, kind of make it look a little bit more natural, you know, something like with different edges. And I'm going to use the marquee tool again, select maybe a different part of it, skew it, maybe grab the tip, make it not centered, something like that. Maybe I'll go ahead and select, oops, marquee tool, and I will select, let's say this part of it and move it around, something like that. Okay, and this looks a little bit more natural. Maybe I'll use the marquee tool. Maybe I'll adjust this one a little bit, something like that. Okay, so here's my kind of rock mount. So this is kind of like how the rocks are going to be piled on top of another. Okay, and like I said, maybe there's some other things we can do. Actually, let's go ahead and do some quick other changes. So I'm gonna go back to the top view. Okay, and there's a opportunity to teach you how to click on an edge. So if you click on anything, right, or click on edge. So here's again vertices, edges, and faces. If you go to the line tool, I can click on a line, and if I double click like I do in Maya, it usually selects the entire edge loop. But in this case, it doesn't, because in Vectary they have this kind of gizmo that shows up. So it allows you to select a polygon, grow or shrink, select all the edges like this, which is not what I want. If I go back to click on this edge, if I double click on a single edge, it will say, well, how do you want to select? And I want to select the loop selection. So when I select on the loop selection, hopefully you can see it, the entire outer edge is being selected. So that's exactly what I wanted to do. And maybe I'll grow it out a little bit. So maybe I want to select all of these. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just kind of going to use, so I'm going to click out of it. It won't get rid of the selection. And now it gives me the gizmo tool so I can stretch it. Okay, rock mounts are not going to be in a perfect sphere. They're kind of ovalish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of scale it, inward or outward to make it look a little bit more natural. So I'm going to scale it that way, um, kind of move it a little bit, something like that. Okay. And now you can see it looks a little bit more natural. It's a little bit more ovalish, not such a weird looking rock mount. Okay, and that's going to be it. Let's go ahead and go back to object view. And let's shrink this thing a little bit down because it's kind of too huge, too large here. So let's go ahead and decide what rock. Oops, look at this campfire over here. It's kind of not where I wanted it. So it's going to go to global. Make sure that the Z position is also 0. Okay. Anyway, back to this. So back to this rock mount. So let's go ahead and teach you how to use this tool. So now that I kind of have a cone that I like, it looks kind of natural, I'm going to go ahead and click on a rock that I like. So I'm just going to choose one of them. The tool doesn't work very well with multiple rocks, so I'm just going to choose one rock. So let's go ahead and choose, let's use the mountain rock here. Okay. All right. So what you had to do when you want to use this tool, and I'm actually going to duplicate this rock real quick, so I'm not going to mess with the original one here. I'm going to pull it out of the group. I'm going to use a global move here, kind of move it away. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the cone and the rock. So this rock is obviously too big. I'm going to go ahead and scale it down because you got to imagine that this rock is going to go onto these faces of this thing. So you don't want your rock to be too big. I'm going to make it literally something like that. Okay, something like that. So, like, remember that. Think about 1 square. It's about 3 feet. So this thing's already kind of a big rock. It's already like a 1 foot rock here. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the cone and then hold Control and click on the rock that you're going to combine with it. And I'm going to combine this rock onto this object, as many faces as this object has. So again, you click on the cone, hold Control, click on the rock, and you're going to go to the tool. The tool is called Array Object. So basically how we did array linear is place objects in a line. We're going to place objects on top of another object. So we're going to click on this button right here. And you can see now that the rocks are on top of the mound. So let's go ahead and change some of the settings here. We're going to click on faces on. So that means now every single face has a rock on it. So as you can see here, maybe I have too many faces and this is not going to work in terms of the number of faces I have or the size of my rock. So either I'm going to increase the size of my rock so that there's no gaps, or I'm going to decrease the number of faces on, or increase the number of faces on my cone. So let's make a decision right now. Um, my cone already lost, it's already baked it. So let's go ahead and just make each rock bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and scale it up. Okay. And just so that there's no gaps in between here, I'm going to go back to my array object and change another setting. You can turn the base object visible or invisible. So basically that cone I created, it's used as a reference, but it's not going to be visible. So you can't see kind of like the outer edges of it. So yeah, this is kind of what I wanted. So basically I have now this rock mount, but if you had to critique it, if you look, oop, there goes that 30-minute ad. If you critique it, the problem with this is that the faces are all kind of oriented the same. So you can kind of tell that this rock was duplicated several times. So now it's an opportunity for us to use the randomize tool. So again, after we created the array object here, I'm going to go to randomize, which is still under the generate tool. And now it's going to randomize all of the rocks. Now, here's the problem with randomize. By default, it randomizes its position. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually turn this down to 1. So it basically doesn't really move the rocks anymore. Any at all. You can actually put it to 0. It doesn't move the rocks at all. We're going to change rotation and kind of play with it a little bit and see how it rotates and really changes the way this thing looks. Okay, and you can go ahead and change the scale. So basically, some rocks are bigger than others. So let's see if this allows me to change the scale. Let's see, 2. Okay, and now the rocks are different sizes. They're kind of jagged on top of each other. Okay, and that's sort of what I was looking for. Um, Maybe I'll decrease maybe more like 0.5. I wish they had a range tool, but unfortunately they don't. So I'm actually going to use 0.5 here. That looks a little bit better in terms of its randomization. Okay, and the last thing you're going to play with is seed. So seed just means it's randomly generated different versions of it already. So you can just kind of scroll around and kind of see which one you really like based on its randomization. Like which randomize did you like? And I like ones that, it's kind of looking at it from the side. Yeah, that looks good. I like that. Okay. And there you have it, a rock mount that was generated randomly with rocks. Um, and now you can make a mountain if you want. You can make something that the player has to traverse. Um, you can make a small rock mount for a grave or some type of worship shrine or something done by cavemen. Who knows? Let's go ahead. But now that we're done, though, let's go ahead and merge these tools, or merge this mesh into one single thing, and we're going to go ahead and rename it. And let's go ahead and double click, and we're going to call this rock mound. And let's go ahead and scale it down or up. I mean, it kind of depends on what you want. If you just want this to be actual boulders, right, then you can leave it the way that it is. If you want it to be like a grave, you might want to shrink it down to, I don't know, uh, 15 feet or something like that, right? About 3 meters or 5 meters. So 5 meters is what, something like that, right? And let's go ahead and let's reposition it globally again to 0 in terms of the height. Actually, I'm going to use the bottom one. So this is kind of when it's useful to be the bottom. Let's say I want the bottom to be at 0. So I'm going to click on this, hit this, and change it to 0. And as you can see now, the kind of the bottom of it is, the bottom-most part of it is 0. So I can just move it a tad bit down because I don't want, because some of the rocks are above 0. And now we have a rock mount that we can put in our scene. And that does it, folks. That's how we can create 3 different formations of rocks for our scene.